The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. Glory to you, O Lord. James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to Jesus and said to him, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." He replied, "What do you wish me to do for you?" They answered him, "Grant that, in your glory, we may sit one at your right and the other at your left." Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you are asking. Can you drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized?" They said to him, "We can." Jesus said to them, "The cup that I drink, you will drink. And with the baptism with which I am baptized, you will be baptized. But to sit at my right or at my left is not mine to give, but is for those for whom it has been prepared." When the 10 heard this, they became indignant at James and John. Jesus summoned them and said to them, "You know that those who are recognized as rulers over the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones make their authority over them felt. But it shall not be so among you. Rather, whoever wishes to be great among you will be your servant. Whoever wishes to be first among you will be the slave of all. For the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise you, Lord Jesus Christ.
As Jesus draws a contrast between authority in the church and in the world, our readings offer us an opportunity to talk about that which is on all our minds these days, the forthcoming elections. In other words, politics. I want to begin by affirming the church's right and obligation to join in civil discourse, especially by applying gospel principles and the teachings of our higher pastors to the issues and political circumstances at hand. I would also add that, having done a great deal of research to ensure that my remarks to you are accurate, I ask that you consider what is said with an open mind and a prayerful heart. Yet, if you give me a fair hearing and later wish to point out an error on my part, I will give you a fair hearing. Hopefully we can all come to a better appreciation of the truth of things and how we should act as Catholic citizens. For the issues of our day are important, very important, and affect not only ourselves as individual persons, but collectively our church as well. Yet, I ask, when was the last time that you heard a sermon on politics? And I'm not talking about a passing allusion to politics within a sermon, not a reference to a particular issue, but a sermon about politics in general. If your answer is a long time ago or never, I would not be surprised. But why is that? If so much of importance happens in the political sphere, wouldn't you think that the church would be more outspoken? In fact, it once was. And there are reasons that the idea of a sermon about politics today seems foreign to us, even inappropriate or offensive. And we will talk about how that change came about in a minute. Mark Twain once said, "History doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme." We don't have to look back very far to find an example of ecclesial political relations gone awry, yet also one which we all feel comfortable passing judgment upon. In the years leading up to the Second World War and the Holocaust, Nazism sunk its roots into deeply Christian, even deeply Catholic culture. And today it is asked, how could that have happened? More specifically, how could the Catholic Church have allowed it to happen? And some go so far as to criticize the church for not being more outspoken, more proactive in the political sphere, precisely because the church could have made more of a difference. Those foolish German bishops, those irresponsible pastors of souls who weren't heroic enough to denounce evil when they should have, those people say. Well, in fairness, it should be noted that the church's opposition to Nazism was, for a while, quite outspoken. In fact, the German bishops even forbade Catholics from being members of the Nazi Party beginning in 1931, 2 years before Hitler even came to power. Yet, then, something changed. After his election, the church compromised. Out of fear of Nazi repression, the church erroneously believed that by signing a concordat with Hitler in 1933, she could guarantee her liberties by agreeing to withdraw from political activism and criticism of the Nazi Party. In the end, she only gave up her liberties by giving up her right to speak out, such that after quickly seeing her authority weaken to the point that she could no longer effect change, the Pope himself had to condemn Nazism, and Hitler specifically, in a 1937 encyclical which had to be smuggled into Germany and was read from every Catholic pulpit. But the point is, it was too late. By choosing to not speak out when she needed to, the church soon found herself the powerless victim of circumstances beyond her control, and the church and world suffered to the tune of 60 million deaths during the Second World War. And so, it is not surprising that having learned a powerful lesson, the church spoke out against the next political threat on the world stage, communism, with greater vigor. Again, communism was a political system, but one that, by denying God and human rights, or in other words, by espousing intrinsic evils, was inherently incompatible with Christianity. Thus, only 4 years after the close of the Second World War, as communism was on the move, Pope Pius XII issued his decree against communism in 1949, forbidding Catholics to participate in communist organizations and parties, and excommunicating all Catholics who refused to comply. The largest mass excommunication of Catholics in history. as communism continued to spread, even to the Catholic nation of Cuba, his successor, Pope John the 23rd, continued this policy by forbidding Catholics to vote in support of communism in 1959 and later excommunicating Fidel Castro. So, pausing, let's take note here. Here we have popes explicitly forbidding Catholics to either be members of or vote for a political party and imposing excommunication upon them if they did otherwise. And this only in 1959. Returning to our own situation, in the United States, the Catholic Church in the 20th century enjoyed a period of incredible growth and prosperity, engaging freely in the political sphere, but not finding herself needing to oppose any intrinsic evils in U.S. politics. For the most part, Catholics identified themselves with the Democratic Party, and statistically, most Catholics were Democrats, to the point that it wouldn't have seemed shocking if your priest even encouraged you to vote Democratic from the pulpit. After all, everyone was familiar with the cozy relationship between the party and the church, and moreover, Americans of all religious backgrounds were used to the American tradition of preachers being outspoken about political issues, even to the point, though mostly in Protestant circles it should be said, of preaching for or against particular candidates. And that's how, in 1954, things changed. Senator Lyndon Johnson of Texas, in the midst of a re-election campaign, found himself the target of Texas Protestant preachers who accused him from the pulpit of being a communist and an adulterer. Johnson responded by offering, on June 2nd, 1954, a floor amendment to Section 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code, making it illegal for such nonprofit organizations to, quote, participate in or intervene in any political campaign on behalf of any candidate for public office, end quote. The amendment, which is still on the books, had its intended effect. Virtuously overnight, the familiar, accepted, and long-standing interplay between religion and the public square ended. Undoubtedly, many church leaders reasoned that this was actually a good thing, which would protect the church from the often surly world of politics. But one thing was certain. All church leaders, Catholic and Protestant, now feared that by exercising their constitutional right to free political speech, they would be penalized by losing their tax-exempt status. Not long thereafter, another radical change occurred, this one within the Democratic Party itself. Many of you can remember the 1968 Democratic National Convention debacle. While the elder party leadership met on the inside of the convention hall, outside, young people rioted in the streets as a sign of their frustration with the nation's oldest political party. In a sense, the 68 convention marked a turning point. From that point onward, the old guard of the party would go into decline, while a new generation of young Democrats would rise up to remake the party according to their values. This metamorphosis would occur gradually, however, so gradually that many Catholic Democrats hardly noticed or objected. To them, since the name was the same, the values were the same. Theirs was the party of FDR and JFK. Theirs was the so-called Catholic Party. I have encountered this perspective on numerous occasions, but as one who never experienced the Democratic Party of years ago, I cannot relate to it. Moreover, as a pastor of souls, I cannot accept it. Why not? Because as a priest, I have three priorities that supersede any political loyalty. The third, and arguably least important of these, is that I am opposed to the scandal that harms the Church and her witness to Christ when Catholics publicly support those things that our faith condemns as intrinsically evil. Scandal such as this certainly occurred during the recent vice presidential debate, when for the first time two men, both Catholics, took irreconcilable and opposing positions on abortion. The second priority I have in mind as a pastor is my concern that no harm be done to others' well-being or the well-being of society. Thus, I must condemn, along with the universal Church, those evils that threaten life and the common good. But my first priority is my concern for the spiritual welfare of souls, for their eternal salvation. And when political circumstances threaten this, then I feel I must speak out for the welfare of my flock and others. Our American bishops have been tracking the rise of those things the Church considers intrinsic evils for some time and with great alarm. A few years ago, they published a document entitled Forming Consciences for Faithful Citizenship, which I would ask you to seek out and read. In it, they affirm the right of the Church to speak on political matters, stating, quote, "The United States Constitution protects the right of individual believers and religious bodies to participate and speak out without government interference, favoritism, or discrimination. Our nation's tradition of pluralism is enhanced, not threatened, when religious groups and people of faith bring their convictions into public life." End quote. The bishop's document also makes important distinctions that we must take into account, especially the distinction between matters of prudential judgment about which people of goodwill can legitimately disagree, and those that involve intrinsic evils which must always be vigorously opposed and which no one may legitimately support or participate in. As the document says, quote, "There are some things we must never do as individuals or as a society, because they are always incompatible with love of God and neighbor. These intrinsically evil acts must always be rejected and never supported." End quote. The bishops go on to offer guidance as to the hierarchy of issues at hand, since not all are of equal moral weight. How to balance the budget, for example, is not in the same category as whether or not abortion should be permitted under law. Our own bishop, George Thomas, echoes these sentiments in his recent article in our diocesan newspaper, affirming that the document, quote, "Faithful Citizenship raises up the clear and compelling obligation we hold as voters to oppose those intrinsic evils that can never be justified and to prayerfully consider those issues that require us to forge new paths to justice and peace," end quote. Bishop Thomas concludes his column by repeating his condemnation of what he terms camouflage Catholicism, or as he puts it, quote, the radical privatization of religion that unhinges the connection between faith and public life, religion and morality, prayer and compassion, worship and justice, or, in gospel parlance, love of God and love of neighbor, end quote. His brother bishop, Bishop Thomas Peprocki of Springfield, Illinois, would certainly agree. Why do I mention Bishop Peprocki, whom you have likely never heard of? Because he has, in a recent article, put into words a position that I and many other pastors feel we must affirm. Taking note of the newest versions of the Republican and Democratic Party platforms, which are the formal, public, and guiding policy documents of those respective organizations, Bishop Peprocki puts it succinctly, quote, the Democratic Party platform supports the right to abortion regardless of the ability to pay. Well, there are only three ways for that to happen. Either taxpayers will be required to fund abortion, or insurance companies will be required to pay for them, or hospitals will be forced to perform them for free. Moreover, the Democratic Party platform also supports same-sex marriage, recognizes that, as they put it, gay rights are human rights, and calls for the repeal of the Defense of Marriage Act, the federal law signed by President Clinton in 1996 that defined marriage as the legal union of one man and one woman. Now, why am I mentioning these matters in the Democratic Party platform? There are many positive and beneficial planks in the Democratic Party platform, but I am pointing out those that explicitly endorse intrinsic evils. My job is not to tell you for whom you should vote, but I do have a duty to speak out on moral issues. I would be abdicating this duty if I remained silent out of fear of sounding political and didn't say anything about the morality of these issues. So what about the Republicans? I have read the Republican Party platform, and there is nothing in it that supports or promotes an intrinsic evil or a serious sin. Certainly there are pro-choice Republicans who support abortion rights and so-called log cabin Republicans who promote same-sex marriage, and they are equally as wrong as their Democratic counterparts. But these positions do not have the official support of their party. You need to think and pray very carefully about your vote, because a vote for a candidate who promotes actions or behaviors that are intrinsically evil and gravely sinful makes you morally complicit and places the eternal salvation of your own soul in serious jeopardy. End quote. We all know how much abortion has taken center stage in political debates and divides for almost 40 years now. In the past, it was not uncommon to hear Catholic Democrats dismiss the criticism leveled against their party by saying, "I'm not a single-issue voter," as if the legal murdering of millions of children in the womb was not a sufficiently grave issue to justify basing one's vote upon it. What I wish to point out is that now that false excuse is a thing of the past. The Democratic Party of today supports not only abortion, and not only abortion regardless of ability to pay, but also the taxpayer-funded distribution and promotion of contraception and abortion, embryonic stem cell research, homosexual activity, including explicitly in their party platform among youth, the campaign to call homosexual unions marriage, the adoption of children by homosexual couples, and the coercion of Catholic institutions to pay for and provide contraceptives, sterilization surgeries, and abortion-inducing drugs in clear violation of our religious liberty. So, how many issues is that? How many intrinsic evils is that? How much evil does this party have to espouse and promote before Catholics will say enough? When will Catholic Democrats either raise a cry against their party or else leave in opposition? Because at the present moment, neither is happening, and the church and society are suffering. Ultimately, this comes down to the following deceptively simple issue. Where does a person's loyalty lie? With God and His church, or with a political party of men? We have seen from history what happens when Catholics or the pastors of our church defer to institutionalized evil when they have the chance to speak out against it. When they cowered in the face of political might until it was too late. In my opinion, the time has long since arrived for Catholics in our own nation and time to apply their Christian values in a bold and courageous way. Let us remember that although the church is both a divine and human institution, a political party, any political party, is merely a human institution, and no human institution is above criticism or above God and His church.